Episode 7, Gifts of Healings. The last episode about the Holy Spirit brings us to discuss the gifts of the Spirit, and raises the question once again of the extent to which all followers of Christ should expect to be involved in healing ministry. The New Testament provides only one pericope that explicitly mentions the gifts pertaining to healings. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Contrary to the idea that this apparent lack in material in the letters equates to a devaluing of its importance, Gordon Fee helpfully points out that Paul's affirmations of the Spirit's manifestations, quote, are sober, matter-of-fact, and usually off-handed, implying that at the time the epistles were written and distributed, the charismata, that is, gifts, were operating well enough that there was no need to address any deficit in the churches. Barring perhaps Ephesus, as indicated by Paul's concern that Timothy stir up the gift that was given him by the laying on of Paul's hands. For congregations in Corinth and Galatia at least, we can be safe in concluding that spiritual gifts were alive and well, and that in the case of Corinth, the believers there actually needed some guidance on how to better steward their abundance of gifts. 1 Corinthians also poses a problem for those who would seek to attribute gifts of healings to the exclusive domain of the apostles, as the lists for their appointment and gifts of healings are distinct from one another. Moreover, both are conveyed as that which is given for the common good of the church. Nevertheless, Paul asks rhetorically, in line with his overarching argument of the section about the different members of the same body, whether all are apostles, prophets, teachers, workers of miracles, have gifts of healings, speak in or interpret tongues, to which the expected response is no. One might conclude at this point that the matter of expectation for believers to practice healing is therefore reserved to only those to whom the Spirit has bestowed this particular gift, but this would be to overlook the gift of faith. All who are born again are those who have all received the gift of salvation through faith, Ephesians 2:8, and each has been given a measure of faith, Romans 12:3. The gift of faith, therefore, must be understood as something unique, to be used for specific situations. So too might we see gifts of healings as that pertaining to specific healing needs. Acts, as we have already seen, speaks of extraordinary miracles. This also makes sense of the way in which James shows how healing may occur both via the elders and other believers confessing their sins one to another. The latter shows how everyday believers are given the expectation for healing, and the former, where the situation makes the calling for elders necessary, quite possibly because elders are those recognized as leaders possessing spiritual gifts. That it is the elders who are summoned and not the sick persons who should go to the elders themselves implies that the type of sickness referred to be severe enough that for the sick person to move or travel is deemed too difficult or not advisable. The peculiar plurality of charismata hiermaton, gifts of healings, may be applicable if such is the case. Thistleton, although cautious not to confine healings to supernatural phenomena alone, suggests the possibility that, quote, the plural healings denote, more probably, more than one kind of healing. The passage, however, still leaves the reader with the understanding that, regardless of plurals, the gifts of healings are among the varieties of gifts that any member of the faith community may receive. The same principles here can be seen in the area of evangelism. Not all believers have been given the gift of evangelism, but all are called to a ministry of reconciliation. In Ephesians, the gifts of ministry offices are for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry. So one must ask exactly what kind of equipping evangelists, for example, are to provide for the saints. Would it not be at least partly to help empower the laity to evangelize? After discussing a number of views on Ephesians 4:11-12, Honer proposes in general terms, based on the most plausible use of the Greek and wider general context, that, quote, the gifted persons listed in verse 11 serve as the foundational gifts that are used for the immediate purpose of preparing all the saints to minister. Every believer must do the work of the ministry. What is this ministry? The ministry of reconciliation is at least one area mentioned explicitly. Based on the consistent use of healing in gospel proclamation in the Gospels and Acts, it stands to reason that the equipping here also encompasses the area of healing ministry. Moreover, the general notion of equipping saints fits well with the observations we have made earlier concerning the nature of discipleship, perpetuating the teaching and example of Christ. Returning to 1 Corinthians, we note how, while order and right motivation are sought, nowhere in the epistle is the exercise of gifts discouraged. Rather, Paul encourages believers to earnestly desire spiritual gifts. While healing is not in focus, we see once again the idea of availability, that of the varieties of gifts, all may seek to receive from God. Here, some may wish to emphasize the Spirit's choosing in the reception of such gifts, but it is not difficult to harmonize both verses by concluding that the Spirit cooperates with the desires of the seeker, much in the same way aspiring leaders are those who seek to lead based on their desires. In any case, it is proposed that there is a distinction to be made between the everyday ministry of disciples to practice healing alongside evangelism, and the gifts of healings necessary for specific cases.